Welcome to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. Here's your host, Morgan Colby and Rick Lemon.
What's going on, Fantasy Champs? 29 Sundays to go until the NFL season starts, and I get to watch Mac Jones dominate the league.
Yeah, he's throwing 40 touchdowns and 2 interceptions.
Everybody just clicked out of this podcast. No.
Mac Jones is good.
Totally prepared for a totally mediocre Mac Jones season this year. But the main point is 29 days. Welcome to Fantasy Jimmy's Fantasy Football Podcast. 29 days. 29 Sundays.
I was going to say, we're already there. Huh?
I'm jumping the gun. Welcome to Fantasy Jimmy's Fantasy Football Podcast. My name is Morgan Colby. I got Rick Lemon with me as always. And we have an interesting show to get to today. We're going to talk about the most consistent tight ends from the 2021 fantasy football season and how that will reflect going into 2022. This is probably going to be the most interesting list because, most players are absolute garbage at the tight end position in terms of fantasy, not in real life. I was watching the Super Bowl and I was astounded to find out that in the non-fantasy football world, CJ Uzam is a good tight end.
Yeah, he's not bad.
He was like, "Oh, that's a super talented tight end." I'm like,
I wouldn't say super talented, but yeah, he's solid.
Is that what we call a talented tight end?
What is it?
Is that what we call a talented tight end nowadays?
Yeah, I guess apparently.
No idea. Like, I guess you could say, like, what's his name? Not Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith. Is he talented?
Oh, yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah, and he's good NFL tight end.
Well,
fantasy.
I don't know if he was this year, but
yeah.
There's actually a rumor that Greg Bedard of Boston Sports Journal was suggesting that he doesn't think Jonnu will be back next year. They might cut him or trade him.
That's a lot of money that you just... I'd rather them cut Nelson Aguilar. But anyway.
I know, but he was like, they think he has promise.
Wonderful.
That's what I said.
But anyway, we're going to talk about tight ends today in the fantasy realm. I always get excited about fantasy football, and I think at some point I got to check the actual calendar here.
We're doing tight ends first, though.
Ooh, hold on a second. We got a dynasty rookie draft coming up next week.
Oh, we got to do some rookies.
Top 5 dynasty rookie wide receiver rankings. All right, never mind. So we're gonna do early running back rankings next week. I can't believe this is already here because it's March 1st. Next week's March 1st when we get this pod out, hopefully.
The draft isn't until April, isn't it?
No, it's not. So, hey, I just put those in March. I don't know if I even scheduled March. I did not. So, anyway.
You got to do free agency, too.
I know.
But I don't think, when does the NFL free agency start? That's sometime in March, right?
Yeah, something like
Middle of March.
I have to check my calendar. But anyway, so yeah, we're going to talk about consistent tight ends today. Before we do that, check out our website, fantasyjimmies.com. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, any of those platforms. Check us out. If you're listening on a podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, or any other podcast platforms, please leave a review, share this podcast with your friends. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe, click the bell for notifications, like, and comment down below any questions that you have pertaining to our show. We're going to start off, like I said, with the tight ends. Are you ready to hop into this partay, Rick?
Yeah. Let's do it.
All right. I'm just psyched up for like when I can do a real mock draft.
Oh, I know. You're gonna have to wait probably 2 months for that though.
2 months? Get out of here.
To include rookies and stuff? Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Unless you're doing dynasty, I mean.
I know.
Even then. I
gotta start getting my my squads together for dynasty. I haven't made any moves yet. I've been kind of melting my brain with work.
I know.
But anyway, so let's talk about the most consistent tight ends. We're going to give you, this is a list of 5 tight ends. We're going to give you 5 tight ends today that have quality or great performances this year. We'll also tell you some of the bust percentages of these players. But, yeah, So pretty self-explanatory, similar to the structure of the last shows. We'll talk about 5 guys. If we get through those 5 guys really quickly, we'll give you some surprising guys that we see on this list. But anyway, let's jump in. Ready, Ricardo?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so first on the list, as you could imagine, is surprisingly, based on the numbers, you look at the tight end 1, you would think Mark Andrews. But it is not Mark Andrews, it is Travis Kelsey. Kelsey did, I believe, play only 16 games this year. He missed 1. Of those games, he had 12 quality or great performances. He had 7 great, 5 quality, and then he busted 4 times on the season, which I think, if I pulled up last year's chart, would be pretty high comparatively. Usually Kelsey gets a lot of opportunity. But he basically did what he normally does for the tight end slot, but a little bit less this year in terms of production. 12 quality and great games, though, out of 16 is 75%, which is good for Travis Kelsey. And it's the highest percentage or the highest percentage of qualifying players in the NFL. So, Travis Kelsey, number 1. What are your thoughts on that?
It's not really surprising. This is standard, I think, because the point total. So, it's really mostly touchdowns and yards. It's not really surprising with Kelsey. And look, he's been the best tight end in fantasy football for years. I know this year it was Mark Andrews. But Kelsey's consistent. I don't know how long it's going to last because of his age, but it's really not too surprising. It's Travis Kelsey.
Yeah. I was going to say, too, Kelsey kind of, and we talked about this in the past, but Kelsey was kind of a little bit disappointing in a lot of ways.
He was.
This year, based on where people took him, because even in standard formats, he was 24 fantasy points off Mark Andrews, so he most likely wasn't going to catch Mark Andrews, even if he played the 1 extra game. But in half PPR leagues, he was 30 points behind, 30, 40 points behind Mark Andrews. And based on, the previous season in 2020, when he went off and people started overdrafting him, he had 260 fantasy points. So he took a step back in the previous year. But the problem with drafting this player really high at this point is that you have to ask the question of, like, if you're going to draft him, you're going to look at him as a wide receiver. So, like, where did Travis Kelsey finish as a wide receiver in the NFL? And he was like wide receiver 10 or 11. And so were you taking him as the wide receiver 10 or 11 or 12 off the board? No, you were taking him as like the wide receiver 3 or 4 if you were taking Travis Kelsey as high as people were taking him last year. So I guess you could say he was somewhat of a bust, even though he didn't really bust at all.
Yeah.
But don't take previous years' hype, especially when a player is old like Kelsey is. Like, I don't think Kelsey's going up.
He's definitely not going up. I could bet money that he's not going up. It's funny. There were people. I mean, we have the receipts. Travis Kelsey 101 should have been first overall pick and redrafted. That was not a good idea. No. And especially most people. I mean, he was consensus first round pick last year, and even that I think was not worth it. Would have been fine in the 3rd round though, which is where we told you to take them. But don't listen to us.
If you waited.
Right. Which he would never go there, but
yeah, so he obviously a really good tight end. He still stays as one of the most consistent tight ends. As far as looking forward, because obviously we have to do that with these players, he was the most consistent this year, based on the amount of games that he played and the amount of quality and great performances that he gave us in all formats. But the question is, does that continue next year? Is that something that we can see out of Kelsey moving forward into 2022? I do think that over the last couple of years, you've seen, like last year obviously was a ridiculous season. And I think over the next couple of years, you're going to see him start to regress and recline a little bit in his career because he is 32, 33 years old.
You have to make tight end rankings right now. Where is he? See tight end 1? 10-2.
That's so
10-3.
hard. I would say he's probably going to end up anywhere between 2 and 4.
Yeah.
So I think
fair.
out of sheer like Kelsey's
I was
good
gonna say
and
2 or
Patrick
3.
Mahomes is his quarterback,
Yeah.
I'd probably have
Draft.
to say 2.
Okay.
But where do I think he's going to finish next year? I would not be surprised if it's 3 or 4.
I'm with you. I'd probably rank him 2, but I really want to rank him 3.
I think he's around more of the range like where George Kittle is with 8 to 10
I think
quality or great games next year, and he decreases in that category. But there's really good tight ends that are going to take a step forward next year.
Yeah.
You have Kyle Pitts, who's going to most likely be the wide receiver
the big
one on the Falcons, and I'd be remiss to say like maybe he should be ranked top 3 right now. So like he's out there. George Kittle is still out there. Mark Andrews had a career year this year. Dawson Knox is also like he kind of ascended in the end of the season into the postseason. You still have TJ Hawkinson out there. Gronk has been rumored to possibly go to the Bengals. Play with Joe
I think
Burrow.
he's going to retire.
I don't think that's going to happen. I think he's going to retire. But like if that happens, that might be
an interesting one.
An interesting situation for him. I don't think he finishes that high. Rick mentioned, did you say it on the show or was it off the show that Jonnu Smith, the Patriots?
I think that was on the show.
So the Patriots are rumored possibly to move on from Jonnu Smith, unconfirmed reports, but that if that does happen, maybe Hunter Henry gets more target share.
And that wasn't a report. That was just a
speculation.
Could be a possible, speculation.
Okay, all right. But so with that being said, lots of good tight ends out there. Freiermuth too. You talk about Kyle Pitts having the best tight end season. Apparently, Freiermuth had the number 6 best tight end season of all time at the tight end position. If they get a quarterback in there, maybe Jimmy Garoppolo, which has been a very popular rumor. He threw to George Kittle a lot. Maybe Freiermuth ends up there as well. So there's just a lot of tight ends that could ascend into that position. And I think Kelsey is old and going downwards, and a lot of tight ends are in the upward trajectory. So I would say don't anticipate Kelsey to do really good. Like this is one of my biggest, like, don't buy Kelsey at this point in his career.
Yeah.
Do you have any more thoughts? Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I think I would probably put him as the tight end 2 in the draft next year, but I agree with you. I think he's gonna finish like 3, maybe 4.
Okay. Let's move on to the next tight end, which is Mark Andrews. He played 17 games this year. He had 12 quality great games, 7 great games, 5 quality games, and then 5 bust games. So he busted in the 1 extra game that he played. 1 more bust game than Travis Kelsey did on the season. So anyway, he had a 71% quality or great performance on the season. So obviously, Andrews is one of those tight ends that I just talked about ascending. I hate looking at last year and going, hey, this guy's gonna ascend into tight end 1 status. And, the real question is, do we want to rank, we talk about moving Kelsey down 2 or 3 in our rankings for tight ends. Is Mark Andrews going to end up being the guy that takes that slot as the number 1 tight end? Or are we going to be talking about, other guys like Kyle Pitts maybe ascending into that spot, which would be a hot take, or George Kittle, who takes Travis Kelsey's slot? I think Mark Andrews unlocked something this year. They played him more. His snap percentages are at a career high. He's obviously an influential part of the offense, and Lamar and whoever else likes to throw it to Mark Andrews. He's a good receiving tight end. I think he stays at that value, and I think he actually could go up a little bit. I think this consistency stays, and if you're looking for a tight end, like I don't recommend taking tight ends this high, but if you're looking for a tight end high in the draft because you want somebody that's going to be consistent on a week-to-week basis, I think Mark Andrews could be at least next year's new Travis Kelsey.
Yeah, the year he had, he's probably going to be the tight end 1. He was significantly better than Kelsey in terms of total points. Kelsey did miss a game, but even in points per game, Andrews was ahead of Kelsey. And that was without Lamar for a lot of the year. So you get Lamar Jackson back. You would think he should be more efficient. Granted, they might run the ball more next year.
Mm-hmm.
but you could also make the argument they'll run more plays. So I think Andrews should be the tight end one, like you said, very consistent at this point in their careers too. I think it just feels like it's Andrews' time to be a top 3 tight end every year, and Kelsey's kind of on the back end. He'll be 33 at some point next year, while Andrews, I think, is only like 20. He's in the mid-20s, right?
Yes.
So he's in the prime of his career.
26.
And again, 26 years old. Yeah, and getting Lamar Jackson back is going to be huge. And he's definitely the top red zone target, and you can make the argument it is just the top target in general. I know Hollywood Brown went off in the beginning of last year, but in the second half of the season, Andrews was getting the most targets a game. So it'll be interesting to see. I'm still not taking Mark Andrews in the first 2 rounds, though.
I'm good.
Even though he might be my top tight end, I don't want to take him in the first round. I'll take him in the 3rd round.
Yep.
But not taking it. And he's going to get taken in the 2nd round, probably, or Kelsey.
Right. I think, too, the biggest thing for Mark Andrews is that it's obviously been that opportunity, too. I just looked up his fantasy point per target share, and he had last year, or this year, 2021, 1.96 fantasy points per target. If you look at the previous year in 2020, he ended up having a 1.93 fantasy points per target. So he's in between that 1.9 and 2 fantasy points per target share. The big difference is that in 2020, he had 88 targets, and in 2021, he had 154 targets. His breakout season in 2019, he had 98 targets. So if that target share of 9 targets a game holds going into 2022, he's been consistent when it comes to the fantasy point per target share, like 1.9 to 2. So like if he stays in that vicinity like he has been his whole career, and he gets 150 plus targets, I mean, he obviously, I think, consistency wise and fantasy point wise, will be the tight end 1 next year. It's just a question of, was what happened this year for Mark Andrews more pertaining to the fact that Lamar Jackson played how many games? 8, and they had a backup quarterback in there, and usually the tight end is the safety valve for a young / backup quarterback. So that's the question. Like, does Lamar target him the same amount? I don't see a change, a massive change in target share from the time that he was. Well, see, maybe there is a massive change in target share. I have to actually look that up. How many weeks did he play to start the season, Lamar?
I can look it up. I think it was, my guess it was like half the season. It says 12 games.
Okay.
So,
all right. So yeah, in the first 3 weeks of the season, he had 5 targets, and then 7 targets. And then week 4 on was when the target share increased. So he had 8 targets, 13 targets, 6 targets, 7 targets, 10 targets, 8 targets, 10 targets, 10 targets with Lamar. And then after Lamar went down, 10, 9, 11, 13, 10.
So he was still doing
6,
good with
16.
Lamar, though.
Yeah, so he was still getting targeted. And there was a lot of red zone targets in that area. So with that being said, to me, I look at Mark Andrews, and I think if he gets the targets, he obviously is going to be the tight end 1. And the snap percentage was up this year. I don't think that changes. I think he's going to be there. 70. Like, that was funny. I just want to give you the target snap percentages. In 2018, his rookie season, 31% snap percentage. 2019, 43% snap percentage. That was his breakout year. 2020, 64% snap percentage. And then 2021, 76.5% snap percentage. So he's increased every year.
Yeah, that's a good sign.
I'm excited to see where Mark Andrews goes. Still don't want to draft him in the first 2 rounds, though, like Rick said.
No.
That would be a disaster. Anyway, third guy on the list is George Kittle, number 8. Oh, not number 8. Number 1. He had 8 quality or great games, 4 great games, 4 quality games, 6 bust games. So he was a lot more inconsistent on the season. I'm trying to find out how many games he ended up playing because he missed time, because that's what George Kittle
he
does.
played in 14 games. So he missed 3 games.
So he obviously had a really good season. Kittle was. I'm curious to see what Kittle's future is. He's 28 years old, so he's kind of on the older side too. He's one of the best tight ends in the NFL when he's freaking on the field.
Yeah.
The question is,
I think as a pure football wise, he is the best tight end in the NFL when he's on the field.
It's like how they get you got to get the man the ball, and B, you got to keep him on the field. And like he just gets hurt every other game. He had 2.08 fantasy points per target this year, 95 total targets on the season. So I'd like to see his target share increase going into 2022, but he was one of the most consistent tight ends. When he's on the field, he is. The question for me, like in drafts, is like where do people start taking this guy? Because when you only have a 50%, 57% like consistency rating or quality in great games, and you have the other 43% of that is busts, like you kind of just look like Dawson Knox, Hunter Henry, Dalton Schultz, Dallas Goddard. Right. And like, where do people draft George Kittle next year?
Realistically, he should not be in the first 4 rounds.
Yeah,
he will be in the. I mean, he'll get drafted either the end of the 3rd or the early 4th. Most likely the end of the 3rd.
They love.
I'd probably say early 4th.
The George Kittle weed.
It's because when he has huge moments and like again, in my opinion, he's the best tight end in real football. But when it comes to fantasy and the statistics, like it's just he doesn't always put up huge games. He'll have games where he gets like 3 catches for 30 yards. Yeah. Like that will happen with Kittle.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't care because he was the lead run blocker as the 49ers ran for 200 yards. Like the way he plays is not always great for fantasy. Yeah. Not to mention the fact with Garoppolo gone and Trey Lance in there, is Lance going to be like the kind of guy that looks for tight ends and has a security blanket, or is he going to be throwing it down the field to Brandon? I don't know. Right. We haven't seen enough of Trey Lance. So it could be a good thing for Kittle, but it could also be a bad thing.
I hope that the verity or the variety, not variety, what's the word I'm looking for? The variables that George Kittle has right now, where he was inconsistent last year, a little bit inconsistent, more consistent than most because he was the 3rd guy. But for what George Kittle usually does when he's playing, he was kind of inconsistent last year. And he has a new quarterback going in. Is that going to like hurt his value, or is it going to help his value? I don't
know. I think it's gonna. I want to say it'll hurt his value.
Okay.
But if you're smart, as much as me, how many people are high on Trey Lance?
Yes.
So it could increase his value.
It's interesting. So this is very early ADP on Sleeper, so I can't really like speak.
Oh, Sleeper's got ADPs?
What? Yeah, there's they have right now running backs: Jonathan Taylor, Dalvin Cook, Nick Chubb, Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, Austin Eckler, Joe Mixon, Christian McCaffrey. So yes, the ADP has kind of adjusted.
Saquon Barkley.
Yes, before Christian McCaffrey, number 8.
That's
interesting.
That's not going to happen.
So this is obviously going to adjust, but right now, Kelsey's the 101. Kittle is the 101 of tight ends. Kittle is going 2 off the board at ADP of 19. So that's basically a late second round pick.
Oh my gosh!
Let me
pull up. I want to pull up the fantasy football calculator.
See if they have
here. Yeah. So Kittle on here is the 3rd tight end off the board, and they don't have the numbers, so I have to count.
Last time I checked, they didn't have any 2021.
Oh no, they had it last week. They've had it since last week because Mixon is going 4th overall. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33. Right. He is the 33rd pick. So what is that? In a 12 team that's in the 3rd round.
Yeah. See, I don't have any ADP from 2022. I do have ADP.
The Facebook calculator?
Yeah.
You don't?
Either way, I think Kittle's going to be probably in that range. I don't know why it doesn't show me any data. Stupid.
I'll have to after the end of the show. I'll send you a link to.
Yeah. But yeah, I think like when you look at George Kittle, like either way, I think even if he's a 3rd tight end off the board, I still think it's too high.
Yeah, it is too high.
Like if Kittle fell to like the 5th or 6th round, I would be like, let's go. I'll draft a tight end early for that. But I just don't. I think too many people like Kittle. Too many people like Trey Lance. And while I do think that his inconsistent year is going to affect his draft stock a little bit negatively, I think that the love for Trey Lance is going to make up for that, and he'll probably end up in a very similar spot to where he was last year.
Yep. I probably won't have, per usual, any shares of George Kittle, which stinks because I like the player.
We have 2 more guys to talk about, so quickly let's run through Dallas Goddard, who had 8, same amount of games as George Kittle, 8 quality or great games. He did play in more games than George Kittle did. So he had 3 great games, 5 quality games, and 7 bust games. For a guy that was getting drafted somewhere between round 7 and 9, I believe. It's pretty good. Kind of got a little bit of an overperformance from him, but it's still gross for a tight end. And I think a lot of these guys after this are going to be kind of a little bit more gross than the rest of them. But anyway, Goddard did have a decent year. He had half of his games were essentially busts. And didn't really have a great season. I think he finished overall like tight end 7. Is that
tight end 8? I think.
Yeah, tight end and half PPR 18 weeks. Hold on.
He did only play 15 games though.
Yeah, he was tight end 10 and half PPR. In points per game, he's right around what you were saying, tight end 7.
And what I will also say about Dallas Goddard is after Zach Ertz got traded, he was the tight end 5.
Ooh.
So for the rest, tight end 6, sorry. But he played in one less game than Schultz, who was ahead of him. So I don't know. He was in the tight end 5, tight end 6 range. He was pretty good. I think he's probably going to finish around where he did this year, though, probably like tight end 6. Sounds about right. But that's pretty solid considering where you picked him. The problem is Jalen Hurts isn't really like throwing for 5,000 yards and 40 touchdowns.
Right.
And with Devontae Smith there, I think he's the top target. But Goddard definitely has a role. And there was some games where he had a lot of targets. He only had 4 touchdowns this year, which I don't know if that's going to change with Hurts. But I do like Goddard. I don't know where he's going to get drafted. But he's someone who is pretty consistent. His ceiling is capped off as of now, but he's very solid and will probably be a guaranteed top 7, top 8 tight end.
Yeah, I think he's going to be decent. I do think that there's a good chance, like as far as the consistency continuing, like I honestly don't think anything's really going to change in Philly unless they change quarterbacks. So, and I do think, you're going to see an increase in some target share for Devonta Smith, but I don't know if that's going to affect the tight end because that's kind of a scheme thing. And they run the ball a lot, and they set up a lot of quarterback runs, which puts the tight ends on the field a lot. He was on the field, I think, 78% of the time last year, Dallas Goddard, when he was playing in the games. So that would suggest to me that if they run, multiple tight end sets out there, that Goddard is going to get a lot of opportunity similar to this year. I think that the hype surrounding Dallas Goddard based on some of the successes that he had this year might kind of drop him into a higher round. But there's also a shot that people were like, Dallas Goddard didn't do it for me this year. I'm going to go draft a tight end high, and he ends up being like around rounds 8 to 12. And if that does happen, I think he's a good buy. I mean, he had 8 consistent games this year, and he was one of the most consistent tight ends. So I think you definitely could buy him at a reasonable value. I just don't know where the ADP is going to land him. If it's high, it's not worth Dallas Goddard.
Yeah.
If it's low, it's worth taking a shot and seeing where that goes.
As of right now, he's the tight end 6 off the board.
Okay.
He's ahead of Hawkinson, which is interesting. TJ Hawkinson looks like he has some good value early on. I think he's looks like 6th round ish. So I mean, Kind of feels like where he'd go though.
Yeah, I don't like it. It's kind of gross.
Cam Akers is crazy though. That's interesting. I just caught that. Side note. Anyway, you want to talk about the last guy?
Yeah, let's jump into the last guy. Is Dawson Knox, and some honorable mentions who are in kind of the same vicinity: Hunter Henry, Dalton Schultz, Gronk.
Kyle Pitts also, who is low on this list because he did have some bad games, but this again is standard. So Kyle Pitts had 1 touchdown on the year, so he obviously was going to be low on this list. But in PPR, he was pretty good.
He had 11 bust games, 4 quality games, 2 great games, and 6 quality great games for Kyle Pitts. And he's still pretty high on the list. He definitely is going to be a lot better next year.
Yeah, but again, it's like in standard, it's pretty much all touchdowns. Like whoever has a lot of touchdowns is going to be higher on the list.
Yeah. So for the final guy, Rick was fawning over this guy midway through the season. He was like, Dawson Knox. I had a share of him, and he's the guy, the only guy, only league that I won a championship in here, the only dynasty league I won a championship in this year, had Dawson Knox on it by accident. So I guess I got the production that I needed out of tight end from Dawson Knox, but he ends up 5th on this list, same percentage of quality and great games as Dallas Goddard. He also had 8 quality or great games, 4 great games, 4 quality games, and 7 busts. So when you look at this overall, basically it was kind of like a mirror image season to that of Dallas Goddard. And I think Dawson Knox is going to get overdrafted this year, but it's interesting to look at how Goddard got drafted high because the thought process was, he's taking over for Zach Ertz in a team that likes to target the tight end position. And and then Dallas Goddard on a team that had like 1,400 different targets that usually get thrown, wasn't even drafted in most leagues. So it's like you get 2 very different guys here, very different paths to this number 1 or this top 5 consistency at the tight end position chart. But I think Dawson Knox moving forward, he's an interesting guy. I don't know where I want to go with this. I know Buffalo throws it 765 million times a game. So like that is very good for Dawson Knox. But I don't know if he's becoming a future target in Buffalo's offense or if this is just how the season kind of played out and Knox just happened to be the guy that get targeted. Surprised more people aren't talking about Dawson Knox and less about freaking Gabe Davis.
Right. His target share did go up, but it's interesting. His rookie season, he had 50 targets in 15 games. The next year, he had 44 and 12, so it looked like it was going up anyway. And then this year he had 71 and 15. So it's not like he's getting a huge target share. He only had 71 targets. Mm-hmm. And he was on pace for doing something similar like that in 2020. So it wasn't a huge change. The difference was touchdowns. He had 9 touchdowns this year. So you could see regression in that. But the way he played might make him more involved in the offense.
He was more often. Yeah.
He was a relatively high pick. So he's got talent and he's young, or at least has been young, and he's kind of going into his prime now. So it could be like a similar to Mark Andrews thing where he, just gets better every year. Mm-hmm. And he's in obviously a high passing volume offense, a prolific offense that throws a lot of touchdowns. Allen is going to probably throw at minimum 30 touchdowns a year. So he'll get involved. Right now, Dawson Knox is the tight end 9 off the board.
Ooh,
so what did you say?
I said I like that.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's 3 spots lower than Goddard. I would definitely consider taking Knox, but he is somebody who, if he doesn't get the touchdowns, he could fall off.
Yeah, the question is, obviously they throw it a lot, but is this season enough for them to look at Dawson Knox and be like, hey, we're going to make you more? Because, outside of Stefan Diggs,
it's kind of open.
It's kind of open. He can take targets from anywhere. The big thing is the fantasy point per target, and obviously this is from the touchdowns, but the fantasy point per target share was, or fantasy point per target total was 2.31, which is number 1 in the NFL. So if he was to get that up to, 100 targets, 110 targets, he would be up there with Mark Andrews, in terms of the 1 or the 2 tight end. And if something like that does happen, which is not like 110 targets on the season is not even that hard to accomplish. If he does something like that and keeps the touchdown rate, Knox could end up being a top 3, top 4 tight end next year that you're drafting in the 9th or 10th Not 9th or 10th.
You know what?
9th or 10th off the board.
Is an interesting stat I just saw too with Dawson Knox is his snap percentage, just like Mark Andrews, has gone up every single year. As a rookie, he was 64%, and he had 20% on special teams. Typically, if you're playing a lot of special teams, you're not going to see a lot of offensive volume unless you're like a kick returner or a punt returner. His second year actually went down 58%, but his special teams also went down. And then this year, he went up to 87% of the team's offensive snaps. So he was out there for almost every offensive play, or a high percentage of them. So that is encouraging for me as well. So I do like Dawson Knox, and I think as like the 9th tight end off the board, it's a good flyer.
Yeah, definitely. I would agree with that. And he was like number 5 on the consistency chart here. So
right.
And this is the one guy too. Like Goddard, I think with the quarterback he has in the situation that he's in, I think Goddard kind of played his ceiling this year, where there could be improvement next year, but I'm not sure we can see that. Art Andrews definitely played his ceiling. Travis Kelsey played his ceiling. And Kittle, I think, is kind of in the middle where I don't think he played his ceiling, but I don't know if we're going to get much higher of a ceiling than what George Kittle can provide at this point. So, and this is the one guy in the top 5 where I feel like there's room for improvement. There's room for them to get him the ball more, and there's room for him to end up in the top 3 or 4 at the tight end position and kind of surprise people next year. And he's getting drafted as the 9th or 10th tight end off the board. And I don't think a lot of people are going to be looking at Dawson Knox being like, oh, well, we need to get this guy. Because they're probably going to feel initially on paper, well, it's just a, flash in the pan season, that type of thing. And, like Rick said, he was drafted, I believe, in the 3rd round in 2019. So this is about the time when a tight end like this would break out, 3rd, 4th year. And so if this looks anything like a Mark Andrews situation, next year he'll probably end up, in a good spot. I don't want to make any like hot projections, but
maybe top 5, 10.
I do like Dawson Knox this year, especially at his current value. So there you go. There are some tight ends that we have on this consistency chart. Kyle Pitts, I was going to mention at the end of the show, being in that situation, 11 bust games, but he's going to go up. TJ Hawkinson was pretty consistent too, so just keep an eye on some of these guys. Tomorrow or Thursday, we have running back, so be there for that. Thanks for listening, guys. See you later.
See you.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Champions Podcast. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes and YouTube, and follow us on Twitter @TheFFChamps.